the author of the new book, Stupid TV, Be More Funny, How the Golden Era of The Simpsons Changed Television and America Forever. Alan Siegel, welcome to the show.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Now, Alan, when I was reading your book, the first thing that came to my mind is years ago, I think like when the first time we had John Dolan, the war nerd, on the show, I remember reading something that he wrote and I quoted it to him. And I said, when you said The Simpsons was the finest example of American pop culture ever produced, and he stopped me there and corrected him. He said, no, I said it was the finest example of American culture ever produced. No qualifier necessary. And I'm wondering, do you think that do you share that description, Alan?
Yeah, I think it's the most influential piece of pop culture that we've. I mean, there's so many contradictions with the show. Like, it is subversive, it's anti-capitalistic in a lot of ways, and it's also like the biggest example of consumer culture in the 90s, like that we have. So it's this mix of everything, right?
I mean, you say like this is the golden age of the golden era of The Simpsons. How exactly do you like set the parameters for what do you consider the golden age of The Simpsons?
So it's basically, to me, it's like what we quote, what is memed, like what is sort of breathed in our language still. And to me, it's like the first, I don't know, 7 to 10 seasons. I mean, you could sort of go like even more micro and be like seasons 3 through 8. But I would say like the first decade is probably a good way to describe it.
And what was your experience with The Simpsons? I mean, like, we're probably the same age. Like, when did you first get introduced to The Simpsons?
So I'm 42. So I was like 6 or 7 when I discovered it, and that was early 1990. And I remember like my friends were talking about it at school, which is a very common experience, I would say, for millions of kids. And my parents, who again were like sort of academic minded, like liberal Jewish parents, like they were pretty open to a lot of stuff, but I remember they found out I liked it and they were like, all right, we're going to watch it first to see, you know, if it's appropriate. Cause they were like very scared of Married with Children, which I think is a very, very fucking common thing for like people of our generation. So they watched an episode and it was where like Princess Kashmir, the belly dancer, was in it. It was like a little risque for like a 7-year-old. So my parents were like, all right, you have to wait. And I don't know if it was just like the crush and the popularity of it, but they relented within weeks. And so that was the start of it. And I've basically been watching ever since.
I mean, one of the things I liked about your book is that, like, it's a history of how of the show, but like so much of it is about like the people. It's about the people who created it. It's about the writers. Like, who are the main, like who's the Hall of Fame Simpsons writers? I mean, like a lot of the names will be familiar to people on our show, but when you're writing this book, like, who are the big characters here?
Yeah, so I would say the top 2 were John Swartzwelder, who is this guy that kind of like looked like a Ralph Steadman character in real life, like mustache David Crosby voice. And so he wrote like 59 episodes. He was this really quirky guy who was in advertising and who liked like old timey radio and had these like really specific references and points of view. And he was like not an Ivy League guy. And the other like sort of top guy was George Meyer, who was, you know, a Harvard guy, like more of an egghead type. And that was he was sort of the archetype of, you know, what the Simpsons writers were like. And, you know, other guys, and it was, you know, all guys. It was like Jeff Martin, another Harvard guy, Conan O'Brien, who came in maybe a couple years in, and John Vitti, who was another Harvard guy. Jay Kogan and Wally Wolodarski were a couple of more. And that's sort of like the classic early Simpsons, right? Oh, and Al Jean and Mike Reiss, who are a writing team who oddly came from Alf before the Simpsons. So those are like the main guys.
I worked with other friend of the show, Jerry Stahl, on Alf. Alan, you mentioned Schwartzwelder and his penchant for old timey references, and when I was reading that part of the book, I remembered when we were lucky enough to have Bill Oakley on the show. And one of the things that he mentioned about like that always stuck with me about writing for The Simpsons is he said that like all the writers, like Homer as a character was basically a guy who was supposed to be their age when they were writing the show. But what he said is that they all wrote Homer from the perspective of their father. And like he used the example of Homer driving in a car singing, "She was a little Spanish flea." And it was this weird mismatch between the cultural references of the era the show was supposed to depict and the kind of the plethora of these old timey influences on the show.
I think what they realized was like they could project almost anything onto Homer. Like the show sort of started with Bart as like the focus, right? Because he was a character that like little kids loved, and that really exploded and made the show explode in popularity. But Homer was like great because they realized like the dumber that they could make him, right? Like they one of the writers basically told me like Homer was their way of sort of working out their childhood deficiencies with parents from the Depression era, right? And so Homer could be an idiot, and then he could sort of like break character and say something really profound. Like one of my favorite examples of that is like Conan O'Brien said that at the end of like Mr. Plow, Homer says something about Barney, like when two friends work together, like even God can't stop them. And Conan loved that, but at the same time, like Homer would also forget how to breathe. So like it was this mix of like odd profundity mixed with like the dumbest human being on the planet.
A quote I really appreciate is that John Swartzwelder said that he wrote Homer like a dog. Like Homer is just like a man-sized dog in that like he could be grieving over the death of a loved one 1 second, and then you could just hand him something in another second, and he'd be happy in talking about that.
Yeah, like a good example of that is like when he eats poison sushi, he eats like fugu or blowfish, and he has this like existential crisis, and he literally thinks he's gonna die, and he has these very like emotional moments, and then the end of the episode is him on the couch eating pork rinds. Like he just fucking forgets.
The Simpsons started as these interstitial animated shorts on the Tracy Ullman show. How did the Simpsons go from that format to being like this groundbreaking sitcom that really broke out Fox as like the fourth big television network?
So again, it sort of sounds like a cliche, like, oh, they had nothing to lose, but really like Fox at the time was the coat hanger network. Basically, another executive dubbed it that because like you needed a coat hanger. Like this is going to date me different for sure, but like to get reception, you like it was impossible almost to get. So Fox threw a lot of money at James L. Brooks, who was like an Academy Award winning director, to make a show. And they all thought, including like Groening and Sam Simon, who is another executive producer, that they were just going to make a bunch of episodes and be canceled. So they were like, we're going to throw shit against the wall and see what sticks. So there was no fear of like, this isn't going to work. Like they just were like, every episode was going to be different from the last one. And that freedom like kind of accidentally created like something infinitely like replicable within the show.
I don't think I forget which one of the who was quoted as saying this, but like the Simpsons were sort of a reaction against the sitcom format of the Reagan era, and one of the quotes was the tyranny of audiences laughing at things that weren't funny. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, like sure. So back then, the 70s and 80s, like it was like the catchphrase era, whether it was from like Good Times or it was so funny. The name that kept coming up was Steve Urkel. Like they just could not handle like Urkel saying, "Did I do that?" like over and over and over again. And it made sense, right? Because they had like these sitcoms had 22 episodes a year, so they had to lean on these tropes. But the Simpsons writers were just sick of that, and they were like they were licking their chops to like do something completely different, because back then there really weren't a lot of jobs that allowed them to do that.
Well, I mean, I think another interesting aspect is that the fact that it was animated allowed the writers to really like blow up and like entirely the sort of format of the sitcom, which usually takes place only in one location, like someone's living room or an office or something. And one of the things that's always been so perfect to me about The Simpsons is that it is really it's about the town of Springfield, and there are like there are so many people that exist in it, and there are so many places that you visit as the viewer. So like, how did they see animation as a way to like really push the boundaries of what you could show in a televised sitcom?
Yeah, so like before that, animation was basically at the time like it was for hacks. Like so it was like My Little Pony and He-Man. Like that was basically the ceiling of televised animation. So, when the show started, they were like, okay, we need to make this grounded. We need to make this like a typical sitcom. But after a little while, they were like, fuck, we can make this, it has no bounds. Like, the word that I kept hearing was like stage bound. So they wanted to do things that they couldn't do on live action TV, like have Homer jump Springfield Gorge on a skateboard. Like you couldn't do that on TV without it being like a joke or a bit. And the original cut of that, like, apparently was brutal. Like Homer falls, he's bloody, he's injured. I mean, it stayed like that, but and another example is like Treehouse of Horror. Like they had a horror anthology on a 3-part horror anthology on a TV show, which like didn't happen before that. So they're basically trying to reinvent the form.
What accounts like in your mind, like or in the book, like what accounts for like the market shift in The Simpsons from seasons 1 and 2 to season 3, like the change in the animation style and like the really like the maturing of the writing into like like the standard of like genius comedy TV writing.
So again, at the beginning, they like needed a palette that people could sort of latch on to. Again, I sort of mentioned this, but one of the writers basically said that like Bart in the first season is like, he compared it, I think, to like Tina Fey playing Sarah Palin, which whatever you think about that, like there was something that like people locked onto, right? Like it, I like the way it looks, it sounds, like everything about it. And they realized that was only a way in. Like, a 10-year-old boy only has so many stories that like could work. But by season 3, they were doing things like, we're going to have like 9 guest stars, like baseball players. And we're going to have celebrity guest stars that aren't just, Albert Brooks. And I think that the world just sort of opened up for them in a way that they didn't have in the first couple seasons. Like I would say like midway through season 2, like, they had Dustin Hoffman on as a guest star, which at the time he didn't even go by his real name because it was so taboo for like A-listers to be on TV. Cartoon.
Well, how did Hoffman end up doing the show as Lisa's substitute teacher?
So it was as simple as his kids wanting liking the show, and he's like, all right, I'll do that. So he's listed as Sam Eddick, which the jokes write themselves. So he just wanted to do it because his kids were into it, and that sort of opened the floodgates. Like Michael Jackson was around that time too, so it definitely legitimized it.
Like in you mentioned the early years, like Bart being like the character everyone associated with The Simpsons. You have a whole chapter on the Simpsons merchandising and the phenomenon of bootleg Bart T-shirts. Like, how did that come about, and what was Fox's reaction?
So I think in the first year of the show alone, they sold like maybe $250 million worth of officially licensed merch. But when you have something that popular, like, people are going to capitalize on it, right? And exploit it in the funniest ways. So bootleg Barts were probably as popular as the official ones. And some of the wildest ones are, you see them at flea markets, like pro-Iraq war or the first Gulf War shirts with like,
Gulf War Bart t-shirts are like that is the rarest commodity. That is the most valuable vintage t-shirt you can possibly have.
It's like Bart giving the finger to Saddam, and like
Amber has one where it's like, eat my shorts, Saddam, or like, I was there and it sucked, man.
Then my favorite is like, I know I'm digressing, but it's like Bart hitting a bong, and like that one was like $100 t-shirt at the flea. But like Fox was trying to shut this down. It was not working. I mean, I found articles with like stings that they had in like Florida where they were like busting bootleg t-shirt makers. Like, no joke, there was one called Operation Dizzy Fox, which is the most quaint thing ever now when you think about like that this is what the federal government is trying to shut down. But it didn't work. And again, there's a reason that there are hundreds of thousands or millions of these still floating out there.
You cannot stop Black Bart. they're still out there.
Well, they like tried to make an official, someone told me he like didn't want to be quoted, but basically that they discussed an official Black Bart like t-shirt, but it was sort of deemed a little a little risque for Fox at the time.
Well, I mean, as long as we're talking about race, another interesting part of the story of like it being an animated show is like the strong primary colors of the show, and the very iconic decision, or like hugely like influential decision, to make The Simpsons yellow, to have yellow represent white people. How did that come about?
So basically, the animator, it's Gabor Chupo, who is like the head of this small animation studio that did the early seasons of The Simpsons. Like, he basically was like, we want this to pop, like to jump out. And like the flesh color, like there's a later Simpsons episode where they like imagine themselves as like having like sort of pinkish skin. And it's kind of weird. Like, it doesn't quite work. It's like Uncanny Valley or something. But there was a woman who worked in the show, and she was like, all right, I know how to sort of make it pop. She just was like, all right, I'm going to choose yellow. And something about it like really like strikes the eye or something like that. And I think it's a part of the reason that kids like the show. It's because like, it's a little off. Like, it's not realistic in that like that alone, like again, James L. Brooks at first was like, this is weird, and then realized like this is how we get people to stop when they're watching TV. Like, oh, this looks a little off, but in an interesting way.
Like, like as a show that it was, initially like thrilled me as a kid, and then like got funnier and funnier as I grew up. Like a big part of it is that it's it's written for both kids and adults, and like so many references to literature, film, and American history, I feel like I learned about through The Simpsons. And I think like it's this double track. And what you talked to Conan O'Brien in it, and he talked a lot about how a big influence on him was the Adam West Batman show, in that it had this kind of two-track writing sensibility about like if you're a kid you watch it and you see like bam pow, it's just a fun comic book story, but then as you get older you understand the absurdist comedy of it. Can you talk about like Conan and his Adam West influence on the show, but like what influences were the writers bringing to the writers room when they were creating The Simpsons?
Yeah, I mean, I've said this before, but basically, like, it's sort of the good side of watching too much TV. It's like these guys like watched so much shit, like the good and the bad, and they were able to like process it into something that transcended it all. So you had Batman again from the 60s, which when I was a kid and I saw it, I didn't get like was satirical in any way. Like I didn't understand that the authority figures were supposed to be silly. So you had that, you had shows like All in the Family, Mary Tyler Moore. I mean, I think like John Vitti said that, The Simpsons was basically Batman and Mary Tyler Moore married. And you had Mad Magazine, you had early SNL, all these things that they took and also like stuff that's not that good, but like a good story that I heard, which was like I asked these writers about like working for the National Lampoon, or rather being in Lampoon in college, and I was like, well, what did that give you besides sort of being around other smart people? And John Vitti was like, yeah, like we sat around and watched the same Brady Bunch episode 12 times in a row to like get all the tropes down so that they could like make fun of them basically, but do it in a way that's like faithful. So it's the show basically becomes like sending up TV and also like kind of secretly a history of it, which is an odd combo.
Speaking of these writers, I think like fans of it, people who think about these legendary names like Schwartzwelder, Bill Oakley, the Conan O'Brien. You think about the Simpsons writers' room in that golden age. You've got a great description of the Simpsons writer room, where you said the carpet was soaked in a slurry of spilled soda and coffee. The surfaces weren't that sticky, but it did have kind of an odor of French fries and onions. Like when you were talking to like Conan or Bill Oakley, like what were their memories of, like what was it like being in that writers' room?
I kept hearing like frat house or dorm room over and over and over. And there was like, it's funny because Conan said this, like there's a romanticization of this where people are like, oh, it must have been so fun. And I think it's fun to them in hindsight, but at the moment it was just like kind of never ending. Like most of these people didn't have kids. Like they were there for 12 hours at a time. Like Swartzwelder was a chain smoker. He was like smoking outside, poking his head in the room, like adding a little line. People would throw shit at the ceiling. Like they would, one thing I heard was like, there were no fidget spinners back then. So they had like a pool cue that they would time each other to like, unscrew and screw back together, and whoever could put it together the fastest won. And so like, it was this atmosphere of just like never ending collaboration until like something unlocked it and they were done for the day. And then they would just repeat and repeat and repeat.
Who was the writer that pretended to be dead whenever anyone walked out of the room?
That was Jay Kogan. And the story that I heard was basically like when he was a little kid. So his dad was like a Mad Magazine writer and like a classic mid-century comedy writer. And I think Jay's mom would be like, now, Jay, no bits at the pool today. Like he just was like this hammy guy.
I mean, to go back to Schwartzwelder, because like, I mean, his name is on a lot of like, probably like all of the best Simpsons episodes ever. And he's like this legendary comedy writer figure, an oddball. Like, what were some of the Schwartzwelder stories you got right in this book?
So he like drove a Datsun in the early 90s that like, quote, ran really hot. So like, it would be like sputtering when he came in. There were stories about him chain smoking. I'm not even sure if this story made the book, but like people told me that Schwartzwelder talked about having this doctor who would be like, now the best way to live is you should run really fast and then stop and then run really fast again and stop. And like, that was his way of exercising. Like you would sort of hear like stories about his politics, that he was like an extreme libertarian, that he like would say shit about, there was more rainforest.
Like the line in Last Exit to Springfield where he says like, and then like about unions where he says, then we'll get lazy and shiftless, and the Japanese will eat us alive. That was a little Schwarzwelder libertarian.
Yeah, and like it's funny, like
snuck into the show.
Yeah, there are like jokes about Teamsters throughout the Simpsons, which I had no idea what that meant as a kid, and he just like what they said about Swartzwelder, like as a comedy writer, like I think George Meyer said that basically like a good Swartzwelder joke is like something horrifying juxtaposed with something really banal. And like my favorite example of that is like in the Hank Scorpio episode where, it's supposed to take place in like this Pacific Northwest town. And there's this montage of like the town, basically gentrifying, right? So like shops become...
Someone should make a town that works.
Exactly. And so it's this montage, and it's like, boarded up stores becoming coffee shops. And the last image of the montage is a homeless man turning into a mailbox. And like, that is the Swartzwelder humor.
Yeah, it makes me laugh just even thinking about it now. So like, as The Simpsons like both premiered and then became this cultural phenomenon, it was, like a take on the classic American sitcom and the classic American family. But like, what were people's reactions to The Simpsons and its portrayal of the American family? I mean, we can get into it later, but famously, their feud with George H.W. Bush, I guess, puts like a fine point on this. But like, what were critics and sort of I don't know, like politicians' reactions to The Simpsons' portrayal of American family life in the 90s?
So critics seem to get it right away. Like they understood that like this was a pretty typical, normal family. Like Johnny Carson, when the Simpsons was sort of battling it out with the Cosby Show, basically was like, this is a more realistic family than the Cosbys, which is, I don't know, pretty bold for a guy like Carson, who was like in his 60s or 70s at the time. But the thing is like the show, like this should not be understated. Like the show really did scare the shit out of adults. Like Bart swearing at his parents, getting a tattoo, like Alex P. Keaton didn't do that. So again, it sounds so quaint.
Well, he was a Republican.
Yes, exactly. Like the show scared adults, and like it was youth in revolt, and I think like that's what scared parents.
I mean, I that's funny. I mean, like, because for me, like, The Simpsons was family appointment viewing at my house on Sundays. Like, it was just the whole family got together. My dad absolutely loved The Simpsons. Like, he had to watch every episode, and I mean, like, yeah, it seems quaint to remember in this context. But like, another quote that I really liked from the book was talking about dealing with network censors. And one of the writers said, like, from his experience working on for another network, he says, like, and being sort of called in to like the official censor. And one of the things they said is, what I realized is that when you work for a TV network, you're not actually working for the network. You work for the advertisers. And like, I think the quote was, on ABC, our advertisers are soap. On Fox, the advertisers are beer. So what you got away with at Fox, you can't get away with here. What are some examples of some of the notes from censors that the writers encountered while working on The Simpsons?
Yeah. So the best example of this, I think, was, and to give everybody context, like The Simpsons basically negotiated to have no network notes. So that's like a little bit different than the censors. Like this is like creative executives basically like couldn't put their fingers into the
How did
pie.
they manage to do that?
So that was all James L. Brooks, who again was someone that Fox was desperate to have on board because he was like this mainstream Hollywood figure who had all these hits like in TV, like Mary Tyler Moore, and movies like, Terms of Endearment and broadcast news. So he basically gave them free reign to do whatever they want, but the censor still had to do their job. And my favorite example of this is like, they wanted to use the word genitalia in an episode. And that was when Marge paints Mr. Burns, and Mr. Burns says, I want to thank you for not making fun of my genitalia. And I think Marge is like, I thought I did. Anyway, the censor sort of was like, let's not use this. So it caused this back and forth, right? Where the censor was like, I think you should use the word equipment, not genitalia. Anyway, this is a minor example, but the point is that like all these writers, like they sent a formal letter to the censor, and it's basically like, if you do this, it's going to compromise our show. And like, we're the last, we're the ones who decide these things. And the censor backed off. And again, like, it's a minor example, but like they really were uncompromising with the stuff.
One of the network notes that I really enjoyed was on concerning the episode where Bart becomes mobster Fat Tony's like sort of a little gopher assistant. It says here, wait, hold on a second. When Bart becomes mobster Fat Tony's errand boy, Coburn was worried. I'm concerned that the script makes it seem that Bart is attracted by the criminal lifestyle, willingly joins a gang, and commits illegal acts for the money they give him, and also that Marge and Homer don't even mind.
Like, again, this sort of speaks to what I was talking about earlier, which is like Bart wanted to do bad shit. And I think that was very threatening. Well, again, the show was, I heard this over and over, like the show was not for kids. The show was not for kids. But Fox knew that kids were like the number one demographic who watched. So shit like that scared them.
Yeah, like, I mean, millions of American children joined the mafia after seeing that episode.
The other one was like, sorry to interrupt, like the it's like when we learned that Krusty's father was like a rabbi, there's a comment from the censor. It's like, we trust that you will not show the details of a bris.
Well, I mean, like an interesting peg here to like The Simpsons and family morality is that like The Simpsons, and you point this out in the book, and it was important to the creators of the show. The Simpsons is like the only American sitcom that I can think of that depicts them having a religious life and regularly going to church.
Like that. See, it's an interesting thing because like James L. Brooks is like a Jewish guy, but he kind of knew that to like launder the subversive aspect of the show or to like counterbalance that, it needed to be like an airtight family, right? So if you watch the show, like religion is very important in it. And that like people forget that. And I think people who sort of criticize the show, like either they didn't watch or they just like weren't paying attention.
Well, one of the people who did watch the show was a speechwriter for George H.W. Bush named Kurt Smith. How did Kurt Smith put George H.W. Bush onto The Simpsons? And like, and what do you make of like the attempts in the early 90s to create this kind of red state, blue state divide around The Simpsons?
So Kurt Smith, for anybody who doesn't know, and I think he would probably tell you this, is like, he's like George Will if George Will liked baseball even more. Like, he's like the most straight-laced guy who loved, old-timey TV and, Andy Griffith. And so he would watch The Simpsons and like in his head, he literally told me, like, he said, this show is like divisive, it's intolerant of the middle class, like middle America, and it's uncivil. And I think like that's something that is underrated. Like back then, that was considered, again, something very like rude. And he was like, okay, like we're gonna make this like a little bit of a hot button issue for the boss. So he dropped a line into one of George Bush's speeches, which was at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention. So the line was basically like, cut down into a short clip, was like, we need more families like the Waltons and less like the Simpsons. And the Waltons was a show from the 70s about a Depression era family who I believe were New Deal Democrats, by the way. And so the Kurt Smith basically told me like, we wanted to sort of push this idea that conservatives could be tolerant. Meanwhile, Billy Graham and James Dobson, like the Focus on the Family guy, were in the audience that day. So it became this soundbite, and it's the thing. It's like, to us, it's so wrong, but like it really was like it made a splash, just sort of all in the wrong ways.
And how did that lead to the famous Homer versus George Bush episode?
So that came way later. Like that was sort of the Oakley Weinstein era. But so when that happened, when the Bush quote happened, like the Simpsons, like, all right, we're gonna respond really fast. So they had a fake cold open where Bart like watches Bush say that line, and he's sort of like, we are like the Waltons. We're waiting for the end of the Depression too. Like it was so ripe for making fun of, and again, like people like my editors were sort of like, like make sure like that it doesn't seem like the Simpsons sort of caused George H.W. Bush to lose in 1992, which is true, but like it was a very good example of just how out of touch the guy was.
Well, I mean, perhaps he was out of touch. But one of the things I learned reading this book is that his wife, in fact, was in touch. I learned that Barbara Bush was a fan of the TV show America's Funniest Home Videos. So like her family values is just seeing families injure each other at like sort of a backyard barbecue, but she was not a fan of The Simpsons.
Yeah, so the funniest part is like an interview she did with People magazine where she was like, she said she liked America's Funniest Home Videos, and she said The Simpsons was the dumbest thing she's ever seen, which is absolutely incredible. And the other sort of political connection from that era that I think people forget is like William Bennett, the drug czar at the time, was in a rehabilitation center and he saw a poster of Bart Simpson. And he said, like, within earshot of reporters, like, you guys aren't watching The Simpsons, are you? That's not going to help you. That's not going to help you with anything. And it's like, that alone got him like kind of pilloried. And this is before the Bush stuff.
Was he visiting a rehab center for his gambling addiction, or was this like just another? Was this some other?
Yeah,
occasion?
You stole my line. I was going to bring that up. It's like the king of morality. And the funny thing is, so he gets called out, and he's like, you know, he has to respond again, and he's like, all right, he's talking about Bart, and he's like, I'm going to sit down with that little spike head, and you know, this is nothing like some soap sandwiches can't, you know. Like can't solve. And the Simpsons writers like released a statement that was like, you know, it's like if our drug czar like thinks he can talk something out with a cartoon character, he must be on something. So like it was always like when you take on comedy writers like that, you're going to lose every time.
Another quote from this section of the book was you mentioned James Dobson, and like he had some book on parenting, like, you know, called like The Willful Child or something. Like he sounds like, you know, Grady from The Shining or something. But I think he said, like, you know, like children must learn to submit to the loving authority of their parents so that they can productively submit to other authority that they will encounter later in their life. And when I think about The Simpsons and like its portrayal of American family life and like American community and culture, the thing that always strikes me about it, and what's so funny about it, is that like it really does, whether it's Principal Skinner, Police Officer Wiggum, Krusty the Clown, Mr. Burns, all of the kind of like ancillary characters that populate Springfield really kind of do serve to show that everyone in a position of authority in America is like completely full of shit. Yeah. But like, but at the same time, it's hard for me to like think of The Simpsons as a parody or satire of American life when like it holds such a loving regard for the people and things that it's making fun of.
Yeah, there's a quote I love, and I think it like is a really good summation of the show and like in America, I think for a lot of people, which is like George Meyer, again, this legendary writer, basically said that like the show is their view on, especially in the early days, like their view on life, which is like it's miserable, it's punishing, it's like unforgiving, and it's also worth living, which again, it's like it sounds corny almost, but at the same time, like that is the show. Like it gave me, I think, that worldview to have like a lot of skepticism and even like kind of bordering on nihilism at times, but also like not giving up, which I know it sounds kind of dopey now, but it's something that I've always kept in mind.
Alan, when you think of The Simpsons or when you're writing this book, like do you have like one episode that you keep returning to in your head, or like I mean it's hard to pick out a favorite episode, but like what do you when you think of The Simpsons is like the quintessential episode in your opinion?
So this probably changes every week, but the one I've been talking about recently is Mr. Plow. So if anybody hasn't seen it, it's completely ridiculous. Plow. Yeah, it's you know it's
Mr. Plow has I think probably my favorite Simpsons. One of my favorite Simpsons gag in it is when the insurance claims investigator is asking Simpsons, Mose, is this a business of some kind? In his head, he's going, don't say it's a bar. Don't say it's a bar. It's a pornography store. I was buying pornography. And I love that because it's a joke that like is hilarious, but it reveals Homer's secret cleverness and intelligence. Because it's actually a good answer in that situation.
These like sort of short declarative Homer jokes. The one that I always repeat, I know I'm digressing here. It's like when Michelle Pfeiffer is the guest star and Homer like is infatuated with her and her name is Mindy, and Homer just goes, Mindy has a motorcycle. And it's just like a stand-in for him being like madly in love with something or obsessed. Anyway, so Mr. Plow is sort of a great example.
Or when they get in the elevator together and he's trying to like not be horny for her, and he says, looks like we'll be going down together. I mean, getting off together.
Again, jokes I didn't get when I was, 12 years old, or maybe a little younger. Anyway, but so Mr. Plow is sort of a good example of an episode that you just couldn't do on live action TV. It's like two people are plow drivers and they're like, Adam West makes a cameo. Linda Ronstadt, who sings like the best jingle. It's like, Mr. Plow is a loser and I hear he is a boozer, which is the Barney's theme song. But so you have all that. You couldn't do that on regular TV. You have Barney and Homer like having a genuine relationship, which is like part of the show. But also, like, here's just like, this is almost embarrassing, but I mentioned this in the book. Like, there's a reference to William Friedkin's Sorcerer in the episode, and it's like, the truck is like on a bridge, and you have like the fake Tangerine Dream score. So I didn't know that was a Sorcerer reference until I was 39 years old, and like the show basically like was like it's everyone's older brother. It's like everyone sort of introducing shit like Sorcerer. If anybody hasn't seen it, like, it got buried by Star Wars in 1977, and so in 1992 when Mr. Plow came out, that movie was like not easily available on VHS, and somehow they like had a shot for shot remake.
I mean, the reference to William Friedkin's Sorcerer, and then also when he's going across the rope bridge, he looks over and there's a suspension bridge connecting the two mountains. Yeah, right. But I mean, I always think of like the voluminous references to Stanley Kubrick in The Simpsons. That like it took me like years to place each one of them. But I'm thinking of the one where Lisa turns Bart into her literal guinea pig for the experiments, and like shocks him every time he grabs a cupcake. And when Bart's reaching up to the two cupcakes, the Clockwork Orange reference to Alex trying to touch the woman after he's been brainwashed.
There's something like I want to quickly mention about that, which is like, again, the idea of like doing these kind of parodies, like we see it on the internet every day with memes or like sort of recreation shot for shot. Like, they didn't have, like, they would send PAs to like the Warner Brothers archive to get still photos from old movies. Like, it was so labor intensive that like the animators were like, one, Rich Moore, who sort of went on to become like an Academy Award winning animation director, was like, it took years off my life. Like, that's how sort of dedicated they were.
In summation, I've often considered the fact that I have been alive for I think 7 years when The Simpsons was not on TV. That was like a period of my life where The Simpsons was not on TV, and it's coincidentally a period of my life that I remember almost nothing about. The Simpsons still going on. So Alan, like, this is about the golden age of The Simpsons, but like The Simpsons in its like decades long iteration, the fact that it's still going now, what it's become unfortunately kind of a joke. Like the recent era of The Simpsons, I think like a turning point was when the celebrity guest stars just played themselves, and it was like, oh look, 50 Cent is in Springfield, like, hi 50, and he's just like, hey Bart, like it's me.
Or how about like, I'm a tennis fan, and it was like, oh, Pete Sampras is on this, Andre Agassi. It's just a strange, but yeah.
Well, I suppose like the original like mega guest star episode was the one with all the all-star Major League Baseball players, but that one worked. But like, what are we to make of like the current, like, I don't know, ongoing life of The Simpsons?
It's sort of like, I don't know, maybe this is a cop out, but like, to me, it's a victim of its own success. Like, it was so damn good for, however long you want to say, 10 to 12 years, 7 to 10 years, that like everything else pales in comparison. And it can be tough now to watch. Like, Julie Kavner, for example, who voices Marge, is aging, and she sounds like when she was playing Marge's mother in the 90s. And so, I don't know, it's like again, maybe a cop out, but like, we want athletes to go out on top, right? But part of me is like let them have their sort of
this is a day. Michael Jordan on the Wizards.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And it's like, and you know what? Michael Jordan on the Wizards would, every 5 games, he would chase down somebody full court and block them from behind. And I think like The Simpsons has the ability to be funny still. It just pales in comparison to what it was in 1991.
Well, Alan, when I think of that golden age, and I want to go like season 3 through 8, I am I'm reminded of this is like when David Bowie died. Brian Eno released an email that David sent him like a week before he died, and like he didn't mention the fact that he was dying. And in the email, I was always very touched by it because David Bowie signed off to Brian Eno by saying, "Brian, what we did will never rot." And like, I think about that when I think of seasons 3 through 8 of The Simpsons, which like, no matter how many times I see any one of those episodes, no matter how old I get, they are still absolutely golden.
I was very worried when I was doing this book that I was going to get sick of the early season Simpsons episodes. And there were moments when my wife would come home, I would be, quote unquote, researching and watching The Simpsons and laughing like an idiot all alone in my house. And like, that will never go away. And I worked on this book for 3 years, and I don't know, it's sort of just piggybacking on what you said. Like, it will never get old to me either.
Alan, my last question for you. Who is your favorite Simpsons character outside of the main family, outside of the Simpsons themselves?
I think Sideshow Bob is up there. I would say number one, just because like that character is such a good parody of like a right wing kind of ghoul, but in the fun, like, but he has juice like a lot of right wing ghouls don't have. Like he's hilarious, and every Sideshow Bob episode from the first 10 years is hysterical. Like that, like the when he runs for mayor is a much better sort of political parody than like even the Simpsons calling out that Trump was president. Like that episode, like they parody like with the Willie Horton attack ad from the 80s. Like it's so prescient in a way that
Like Sideshow Bob even released the Dangerous Criminal, like Sideshow Bob.
it's like, yeah, and then it's like, and this ad was brought to you by the Sideshow Bob campaign.
Yeah. Yeah, well, actually, very connected to Sideshow Bob, I would say my favorite character is Krusty the Clown. I love Krusty.
The Krusty line that I love, which I will not shut up about, which is a good example of like a line that I didn't know was a Simpson line, which is like when the film festival episode where Mr. Burns buys him off, and you know Krusty's talking about the movie that Mr. Burns made, and he's like, let's just say it moved me to a bigger house. And then he goes, oops, I said the quiet part loud and the loud part quiet. And I think like that's another example again of like, I didn't even remember that was a Simpsons line.
Alan Siegel, thanks so much for stopping by. The book is Stupid TV, Be More Funny.